My daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eye and told me the Thanksgiving table was full. I'm not talking about chairs. There were plenty of chairs. I could see them through the window from where I was standing on my own son's front porch. A porch I helped pour the concrete for with my own 2 hands 3 summers ago. 8 chairs around that dining table. 8 chairs, and not one of them had my name on it, according to her. "We have a seating arrangement, Ted," she said. Her voice was the kind of calm that takes practice. "I didn't think you'd want to be cramped in with everyone. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. I've sat through budget meetings that lasted 6 hours. I know what it sounds like when someone is managing you instead of talking to you." I told her that was fine. I'd head back to the hotel. She nodded and closed the door before I finished the sentence. I sat in my rental car for probably 10 minutes in that driveway. The engine was off. It was getting dark by 4:30 because it was November, and we were up in Asheville, North Carolina, which is beautiful country but goes cold fast. I could see the kitchen light through the front window. Warm amber light. I could hear what might have been laughter, though maybe I imagined that part. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. This wasn't a surprise that came out of nowhere. The surprise is that I kept letting it go on as long as I did. My son's name is Eric. He's 39. He works in commercial real estate, which he's good at, and which I'm proud of even now, even after everything. He met his wife, Noelle, at a charity auction about 8 years ago. She was bidding on a weekend at a bed and breakfast in Savannah. Eric outbid her. She thought it was charming. I thought it was an expensive way to get a date, but I kept that to myself. They got married 4 years later. Nice ceremony. Outdoor venue near a lake. I walked Eric to the altar because his mother passed when he was 26, pancreatic cancer, fast, and I was the only family he had left aside from my sister out in Phoenix. I cried at that wedding. Real tears, not the polite kind. What I'm telling you is that I loved my daughter-in-law. Past tense is intentional. I loved who I thought she was. The first time I noticed something off was about 2 years into their marriage. Noelle had grown up in a well-off family in Charleston. Her father was a cardiologist. Her mother did charity work and had strong opinions about table settings. There's nothing wrong with any of that on its own. But Noelle had developed, over the years, a very specific way of talking about money. Not spending it, talking about it. She would mention, in passing, things like square footage and investment accounts and what neighborhood a person lived in. She'd ask you where you'd been vacationing the way other people ask how your health is. Not because she cared, but because the answer told her something she wanted to know. I drive a 2018 Ford F-150. It has 74,000 miles on it and a small dent on the rear passenger door from a parking lot in Raleigh. It runs fine. I own a 3-bedroom house in Greensboro that I paid off 8 years ago. I have a retirement account, a modest investment portfolio, and enough in savings that I don't lose sleep over money. I'm not flashy about it. My father wasn't flashy about it. That's just how I was raised. Noelle, I came to understand, interpreted not flashy as less than. I started noticing how she'd redirect conversations when I was talking, how she'd smile at the right moments but look at her phone, how she always had somewhere else to be about 45 minutes into my visits. Small things. The kind of things you tell yourself you're imagining because the alternative, that your son's wife genuinely doesn't think you're worth her time, is too sad to sit with. The money started about 3 years ago. Eric called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. He usually texted. He said they'd found a place. A house in a newer development outside of Asheville. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a double garage, a sunroom Noelle had been wanting. The neighborhood had a name that sounded like a golf course, Creekside Reserve or something like that. The listing price was $740,000. I asked him how they were planning to finance it. He said they had enough for a down payment, but the monthly payments would be tight for the first couple of years, while Noelle was building her interior design business. He said he'd been thinking, and then he paused in the way people pause when they've already decided something and are now asking permission. He said he'd been thinking it would mean a lot to him if I could help with the mortgage while they got on their feet. I want to tell you I hesitated. I want to tell you I asked questions, that I had a long conversation with him about terms and expectations. But the honest truth is I said yes within about 30 seconds. He was my son. He'd had a hard few years. The housing market was brutal. I had the money. I set up a direct transfer of $2,800 every month to cover the mortgage. I also paid for the new HVAC system when the old one failed in the first summer, $11,400. I paid to have the sunroom repainted when Noelle decided she'd wanted sage green instead of the beige it came with. That was $2,100. I'm not listing these things to keep score. I'm listing them because eventually someone else started keeping score, and they were counting different numbers than I was. The second Thanksgiving after they moved in, so about 2 years before the one I described at the beginning, I drove up to Asheville for the holiday. It was the first time I'd seen the house at full capacity. Noelle's parents were there, her sister and brother-in-law, 2 couples from their neighborhood, and a friend of Noelle's from her college days. 12 people in total. Noelle's father, Charles, is a fine man, quiet, precise, the kind of doctor who talks about things in percentages. We'd had pleasant enough conversations over the years about sports and local politics, but that Thanksgiving, something was different. He made a comment at the table. We were talking about the house, about the neighborhood, and he said in that easy way that powerful people say things, "Well, it's a beautiful investment. You two should be proud of what you've built here." What you two have built. I looked at Eric. Eric looked at his plate. I didn't say anything. I cut my turkey and talked to Noelle's sister about her kids' soccer league and drove back to my hotel that night and thought about it until about 1 in the morning. Maybe Eric hadn't told his in-laws. Maybe it was a private thing, and he wanted to keep it that way. I could respect that. I didn't need credit. But something shifted in me that night. Quietly. The way a foundation shifts. You don't see it, but the doors start sticking. Over the next several months, I noticed the house showing up on Noelle's social media. She had an Instagram for her interior design work, and she used the house extensively, the sunroom especially, with its new sage green walls. She'd post things like our forever home and the space we've created together. The engagement was good. She was building a brand. I understood that. But I kept looking at those posts and thinking about the $2,800 that hit their account on the first of every month, and feeling something I didn't have a clean word for. I brought it up to Eric in February. Not accusatory. I want to be clear about that. I called him and said I wanted to check in about the financial arrangement, asked how things were looking, whether Noelle's business was picking up enough that we might be able to start talking about a timeline for me stepping back. He said things were going great. He said Noelle had landed 3 new clients, and they were optimistic. He said maybe by the end of the year. I said that sounded good. He said, "Thanks, Dad. It really means a lot." I believed him. In July, I drove up to Asheville for a long weekend. I hadn't told them exactly when I was coming. I'd mentioned I might come up sometime that month, and Eric had said, "Great. Just let us know." So I called when I was about 2 hours out. Noelle answered Eric's phone. She said they had people coming for dinner that evening, and it might not be the best night. I said I understood completely. I'd just swing by to say hello, and then check into my hotel and we could make plans for the next day. She said okay, but her voice had that practiced calm again, the one I'd learned to read. I pulled up around 5:30. There were 3 other cars in the driveway. I knocked. Eric answered and hugged me and seemed genuinely glad to see me. He brought me inside and introduced me around. 2 couples, neighbors from down the street. Nice people, friendly. Noelle came out of the kitchen with a bottle of wine, and she smiled at me and said, "Ted, I didn't realize you'd be staying." I said I wasn't staying. I'd just come to say hello. She smiled again and said, "Right, of course." I had a glass of iced tea. I sat with Eric for about 20 minutes. Then I made an excuse and left. I drove to the hotel and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my shoes for a while. My granddaughter was born that October. Eric's daughter. They named her June. I know, I thought of my mother when I heard that, and she had Eric's forehead and what looked like dark hair, though newborn hair is hard to predict. I held her in that hospital room for about 15 minutes, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Eric himself was born. Like the world had organized itself correctly, just for a moment. I thought maybe June would change things. New babies have a way of rearranging people's priorities. I thought maybe Noelle would want June to have a close relationship with her grandfather. I wanted that more than I can explain. I drove up to Asheville 3 times in the next 8 months. Christmas, March, June. Each visit was a little shorter. Each visit had a reason it wasn't quite convenient. Christmas was a lot of family around. It was hectic. March, Eric was dealing with a big deal closing. June, they had plans. They were heading to Hilton Head the following week. Things were crazy. I held June each time. That part was always good. She'd grab my finger and look at me like she was trying to figure something out. Kids do that. I'd talk to her in a low voice, and she'd watch my mouth move. Those 15-20 minutes were the best parts of every visit. Then came the Thanksgiving call. It was 3 weeks before the holiday. Noelle called me, not Eric, Noelle, and she said they were doing a big Thanksgiving this year. Her whole family was coming up from Charleston, plus some friends, and they were going to have to limit the guest list to keep things manageable. She said she hoped I'd understand. I held the phone and I looked out my kitchen window at the maple tree in my backyard. It had gone red by then, that deep October red, and some of the leaves were already down. I asked her if Eric knew she was calling me. She said of course they'd talked about it. I asked if I could speak to him. She said he was out. She said he'd call me later. He didn't call me that night. He called me 2 days later and said he was sorry and that it was just logistics. It was nothing personal. They'd do something with me the weekend before or the weekend after. I said okay. I said I understood. I don't know why I said that. Habit? Maybe. Or the same thing that kept me cutting my turkey and talking about soccer leagues and driving back to hotels. But I drove up anyway. I told myself I was going to be nearby for other reasons, which wasn't entirely untrue. I have an old friend from college who lives in Black Mountain, about 20 minutes from Asheville. I had lunch with him on Wednesday, and then Thursday, Thanksgiving, I found myself driving past the house. I don't fully understand why I stopped. Maybe I needed to see it. The cars in the driveway, 4 of them, including Eric's, the warm light in the windows, the maple tree they'd planted in the front yard the first fall they moved in, the one I'd helped them stake so it wouldn't blow over in the storms. I knocked. Noelle opened the door. She was in a burgundy wrap dress, hair done, the whole picture. And her face, when she saw me, it lasted, but I saw it. Not surprise. Irritation. "Ted," she said, "we're in the middle of dinner." I said I knew. I said I just wanted to stop by. I asked if I could come in and see June, just for a few minutes. She said it wasn't a great time. I said, "Noelle, it's Thanksgiving," she said. "I know what day it is. I told you we had a full table." And then she said the thing that I have turned over in my mind probably 100 times since. She said, "I think it's better for everyone if you give us a little space today. Better for everyone." I nodded. I said, "Okay." I walked back to my car. I didn't sleep well that night, or the next several nights, honestly. I lay in the hotel bed thinking about the $2,800, thinking about the HVAC system, the sage green sunroom that Noelle photographed for her Instagram while she was building her brand on the back of a mortgage I was paying. Thinking about June's face, the way she looked for me when she heard my voice. I want to be honest with you. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was grief. I missed my son. Not the adult who let his wife close a door in his father's face on Thanksgiving, but the boy who used to fall asleep in the car on road trips and wake up confused. And I'd tell him it was okay, we were almost there. I missed that kid. I missed being needed by him in a way that felt like love instead of a line item. But grief has a way of clarifying things, if you give it time. When I got back to Greensboro, I called my accountant. His name is Phil. He's been handling my finances for 12 years, sharp man, knows every number I've ever earned or spent. I asked him to walk me through the full picture of what I'd put into Eric and Noelle's household over the past 3 years. He called me back 2 days later with the full accounting, $119,400. That was the number. The monthly transfers, the HVAC, the paint, a few other smaller things I'd half forgotten. $119,000. I sat with that number for a while. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Beverly, and she is not the kind of woman who wastes words. I told her the situation, not all the emotional weight of it, just the facts, and I asked her what my options were. She said I had every right to stop the transfers at any time, since there was no formal agreement. She recommended I get the arrangement documented going forward, regardless of what I decided. She also asked if I had anything in writing about their understanding of the support. I said no. She said that was worth knowing. I thought about it for 2 more weeks. I'm not impulsive. I wanted to be certain I wasn't acting out of hurt feelings. I asked myself, if Noelle had been warm to me, If Eric had called me on Thanksgiving, if I'd spent that holiday with my granddaughter, would I still be doing this support? And the answer was yes. Probably for another year, maybe two. I had genuinely wanted them to get stable. But there's a difference between helping someone get on their feet and being erased while you do it. I wrote Eric a letter. I still write letters sometimes, on paper, by hand. I told him that I loved him. I told him I was proud of who he'd become as a professional, as a father. I told him that I had not felt welcome in his home in a long time, and that I had tried to tell myself it was something I was misreading, but that Thanksgiving had made it impossible to keep pretending. I told him I was stopping the monthly transfers, effective the 1st of January. I told him I'd honored the arrangement for 3 years, and I believed that was enough time for them to have made other plans. I told him I was not doing this in anger, and I was not doing it to punish him. I was doing it because I needed him to understand that my presence in his life and in June's life was not negotiable, and that money does not replace presence. I mailed it on a Monday. He called me on Thursday. His voice was different from what I expected. Not angry, something younger than angry. He said he didn't know what to say. I told him he didn't have to say anything right then. I told him the letter wasn't an ultimatum. It was a conversation I should have started a year ago, and I was sorry I'd waited. There was a long quiet on the line. Then he said, "She told me you showed up unannounced." I said I hadn't exactly been unannounced. I said I'd been trying to visit my son and my granddaughter on Thanksgiving. Another quiet. He said, "I should have called you." I said, "Yeah, you should have." That was the whole conversation, more or less. We hung up. I didn't know what would happen next, and I made myself be okay with not knowing. What happened next took about 3 weeks. Noelle's parents, I found out later, had been under the impression that Eric and Noelle were financially independent, that the house, the life, all of it was built by the two of them. When Eric told his father-in-law the truth, that a significant portion of their stability for the past 3 years had come from me, Charles, to his credit, was not pleased. He called it a significant misrepresentation. Those were the words Eric used when he relayed the conversation to me. The mortgage company called Eric on a Wednesday in December, when the first missed payment hit their system. It wasn't my doing. I'd given him plenty of notice in the letter. But the reality of a $2,800 gap in the monthly budget is different from reading about it. Eric had to make some fast decisions about refinancing, about restructuring. It was a hard few weeks for them, by all accounts. I didn't take pleasure in that. I want to be clear about that, too. I'm not the kind of man who enjoys watching his son scramble, but I also didn't soften it. I'd given him the time and the information. What he did with it was his to manage. In January, Noelle called me. Not Eric this time, Noelle. She asked if we could talk. I said yes. She drove down to Greensboro on a Saturday, which surprised me. She sat in my living room with a cup of coffee, and she looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Not the polished, managed version of herself. Just tired. She didn't apologize immediately. She's not built for quick apologies. But she talked. She said she'd grown up with a father who provided everything, and she'd learned, without realizing it, to sort people by what they could give. She said she hadn't thought about how that looked from the outside. She said the Thanksgiving thing, she knew it wasn't right. She'd known it that night, but she'd told herself it was easier. I listened to all of it. I told her I appreciated her coming. I told her I didn't need her to be a different person than she was. I just needed her to understand that I wasn't a resource. I was Eric's father. I was June's grandfather. That relationship doesn't get managed around a dinner table seating chart. She nodded. She looked out the window at my maple tree. She said, "She asks about you, you know, June. She points at your picture on the fridge." I had to look at the ceiling for a second. She said she wanted to try again. She said she knew she'd have to earn it, and she wasn't asking for everything to go back to normal immediately. I told her I wasn't either. It's been about 7 months since that conversation. Things are not simple. Families don't go back to normal. They go forward to something new, which is slower and more awkward and doesn't have a clean resolution the way movies pretend. Eric and I talk more now. Real talks, not the managed check-ins we'd been doing. He told me last month that he should have said something to Noelle years ago, that he'd seen the way she treated me and he'd chosen the easier path. I told him I understood that, and I also told him I needed him to choose harder going forward. He said he would. I believe him, The way I believe most things my son tells me, with hope and with my eyes open. I drove up to Asheville in April. No hotel this time. I stayed in the guest room. June was 18 months old by then, walking with that determined wobble that toddlers have into everything. She found my shoes fascinating. She carried one of them around the living room for about 20 minutes, and I let her, because honestly I would have let her do just about anything. We had dinner together, the four of us, at the kitchen table. Noelle made chicken piccata. She asked if I wanted more before I'd finished what was on my plate, which I noticed. Small thing, but I noticed. After June went to bed, Eric and I sat on the back porch. It was cold enough for jackets, and we sat there anyway. The neighborhood was quiet. You could hear somebody's wind chimes down the block. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have." I said, "Eric, I know." We sat there for a while longer without saying much. That was enough. Sometimes that's the whole thing. Just sitting somewhere together in the quiet and not running away from it. I paid for the chicken piccata ingredients, not the mortgage, not the renovation, just groceries. That felt about right.